Liberal Viewer presents.
So one of the more interesting responses I saw to President George W. Bush's January 10th speech on Iraq came from Katrina vanden Heuvel of The Nation magazine, who claimed,
"What was truly frightening about last night's speech is, in my view, it's essentially a prelude to war with Iran. What has been missed in so much of the commentary is a sense that this president wants a widening war in a region that is already racked with chaos and violence, in a region where any chance of democracy being brought to other parts of the Middle East is being lost as those countries and Democrats in those countries look at the chaos in Iraq."
Well, I disagree with vanden Heuvel's assessment that the U.S. is preparing for war with Iran. I just don't think there are the troops, as evident from Stephen Colbert's sarcastic skewering of the Bush surge here.
President Bush is set to send more troops to Iraq. Pack your bags, Boy Scout Council 289.
But I do agree with Katrina vanden Heuvel that President George W. Bush did seem to go overboard vilifying the admittedly villainous countries in the region in this part of his speech.
Succeeding in Iraq also requires defending its territorial integrity and stabilizing the region in the face of extremist challenges. This begins with addressing Iran and Syria. These two regimes are allowing terrorists and insurgents to use their territory to move in and out of Iraq. Iran is providing material support for attacks on American troops. We will disrupt the attacks on our forces. We will interrupt the flow of support from Iran and Syria. And we will seek out and destroy the networks providing advanced weaponry and training to our enemies in Iraq.
So you can see why so many people have emphasized Bush's bellicosity in the speech, and it couldn't come on a worse issue. In fact, some of the best analysis I saw on that point, albeit again satirical, came from Daily Show military analyst, comedian, and former Marine Rob Riggle, who described what a military solution to regional ethnic conflicts might look like here.
Here's what has to happen for this plan to succeed. We have to work with the Shiite militia to crush the Sunni insurgency. Once the Sunnis have been eliminated, we will then have to fight the mainly Shiite military to keep the country from falling under the influence of Iran.
But how do we do that?
By allying ourselves with the radical Muqtada al-Sadr, an anti-Iranian cleric.
Okay.
Pretty simple. Once the Shiites have been crushed with al-Sadr's help, we must crush al-Sadr with the help of the Kurds in the north, whom we will then join with the Turks to crush.
So it's just that simple. But if Comedy Central satire doesn't convince you of the futility of a military solution to regional ethnic conflicts, just look at a map. Iran and Iraq's other neighbors have a huge stake in the future of Iraq. You can even see the bipartisan Iraq study group, to which I've provided a link in the description of this video, make the argument that the diplomatic effort should include every country that has an interest in avoiding a chaotic Iraq, including all of Iraq's neighbors. And that's the key. An interest in a stable Iraq is the one thing all of Iraq's neighbors have in common. In fact, just before the Iraq Study Group report was formally released, on the December 3rd edition of This Week with George Stephanopoulos, you can see Stephanopoulos and Martha Raddatz arguing that a U.S. threat to withdraw from Iraq might be the one thing to bring everyone together diplomatically, as you can see here.
It does appear, Martha, that what the Baker Commission is banking on is that even any talk of withdrawal is going to engage the neighbors. They're going to be more afraid of withdrawal than anyone else. Iran doesn't want it. Saudi Arabia doesn't want it. Jordan doesn't want it. So that's going to create the impetus for some kind of diplomatic solution.
And that may create the impetus for a diplomatic solution. But then again, you have the president saying that's not going to happen.
And that was the biggest mistake in Bush's speech. Because what the Middle East needs right now is something like the Congress of Vienna in Europe a couple hundred years ago, that was partially successful in redrawing the map of Europe to redress European ethnic conflicts. And we could update our 21st century Congress of Vienna for the Middle East with Wilsonian principles of democracy and human rights from the 20th century. And speaking of Wilsonian principles of democracy, I thought it relevant to remember that point number 12 of Wilson's 14 points promised that the Turkish portion of the present Ottoman Empire should be assured a secure sovereignty But the other nationalities which are now under Turkish rule should be assured an undoubted security of life and an absolutely unmolested opportunity of autonomous development. And for those who don't remember, here is a map of the Ottoman Empire that President Woodrow Wilson was talking about. So you can see these problems have been around for a while, which is why I'm skeptical when some of my YouTube friends get behind a simple slogan advocating for the US to get out of Iraq. I worry that just leaving Iraq now would be like leaving the scene of an accident, or the scene of a crime, depending on whether you view the war as an accident or a crime. But however the US got into Iraq, the US now bears certain responsibility for the Iraq it leaves behind. Which is why I ask, what do you think about having a 21st century Congress of Vienna for the Middle East based on Wilsonian principles of liberal democracy? And if you don't like it, how would you recommend the U.S. withdraw from Iraq in a way that minimizes additional Iraqi suffering and promotes peace, liberty, and justice in the region?
I YouTube, you decide.